God, if I leave him, am I leaving you too?
She stood barefoot on cold cement at midnight, locked out of her own home, wearing her husband's church t-shirt, the one that said faith over fear, while he slept peacefully inside. She didn't scream. She didn't bang on the door. She just looked up at the sky and whispered the question that had been destroying her soul for 3 years. God, if I leave him, am I leaving you too? Grace Adeyemi had prayed for one thing her entire life. Not fame, not wealth, not even a beautiful house with a white picket fence, though she had imagined that too, in the quiet corners of her girlhood dreams. She had prayed for a godly man. Every night, from the age of 17, she would kneel beside her narrow bed in her mother's house, clasp her hands so tightly her knuckles turned pale, and whisper the same prayer into the darkness. Lord, send me a man who loves you first. A man who will lead me, cover me, and walk with me all the days of my life. I trust you, Father. I trust your timing. She waited, patiently, faithfully, watching friends marry one by one, attending baby showers and bridal showers, always smiling, always celebrating, always quietly returning home to her prayer journal and writing the same words in different ways. God, I believe. I still believe. Then, on a rainy Sunday morning in October, Daniel Mensah walked into her church. He was everything she had described to God in her prayers, almost as if the Almighty had read every single entry in that worn leather journal. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that filled every room he entered. But it wasn't his looks that captured Grace's heart, it was the way he prayed. The first time she heard him lead the congregation in prayer, she felt goosebumps rise on her arms. His voice was deep and certain, like a man who had walked with God through fire and come out refined. He quoted scripture with such authority, such love, that several women in the congregation openly wept. He volunteered for the youth ministry. He organized outreach programs. He carried elderly women's bags after service without being asked. That man, Grace's mother whispered to her one Sunday, nudging her gently, is the kind of man you marry. Grace blushed and said nothing. But inside, her heart was already writing his name in the margins of her prayers. When Daniel finally approached her, 3 months of slow, respectful courtship, Grace was convinced beyond every shadow of doubt. This is God. This is his answer. Their wedding day was the most beautiful day of Grace's life. White roses and golden candles, scripture readings and worship music that brought the whole congregation to their feet. Her father wept openly as he walked her down the aisle. Her mother pressed a handwritten note into her palm before she stepped forward. Baby girl, God has been faithful. Enjoy every moment of this blessing. Grace floated through that entire day on a cloud of joy, so thick she could barely breathe. When Daniel lifted her veil and looked into her eyes at the altar, she saw forever in his gaze. She truly believed she was the most blessed woman on the face of the earth. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. Nobody tells you that abuse doesn't arrive in a hurricane. It comes like a slow leak in a roof, a single drop, barely noticeable. You tell yourself it's nothing. You put a bucket under it and move on. Then another drop, then another, until one day you realize the whole ceiling has been rotting above your head, and you never even saw it happening. For Grace, the first drop came 2 weeks after their honeymoon. They were getting ready for a dinner with church friends, and Grace came downstairs in a blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion. She twirled once, nervous and hopeful. Daniel looked up from his phone, glanced at her slowly from head to toe, and turned back to his screen. You're wearing that. Grace froze. Yes. Why? Is something wrong? Nothing. A pause. It just looks a little desperate, don't you think? We're going to church people's house, not a nightclub. Grace changed her dress. She told herself he was right. She told herself he was protecting her. That's what a covering husband does, she reasoned. He corrects you. That's love. But the correction didn't stop with her dress. Her cooking was good, but not quite right. Her laughter was too loud for a pastor's wife. Her prayers were too emotional, too performance-based. Her friendships were unhealthy influences. Her own mother called too often. Each critique arrived wrapped in scripture. A wise woman builds her home, Grace. Proverbs 14 verse 1. A gentle and quiet spirit is what God values. 1 Peter 3 verse 4. Submitting to your husband is submitting to God. Ephesians 5 verse 22. Grace absorbed every word like a sponge. She studied harder, prayed longer, cooked earlier, spoke softer. She became a smaller and smaller version of herself, squeezing into the shape of the woman Daniel seemed to want, convinced that if she could just get it right, the man she had married at the altar, the one who prayed with tears in his eyes, would finally come home to her. But that man had never truly existed. By their second year of marriage, Grace had stopped calling her best friend Temmie, not because she wanted to, but because every phone call ended the same way, with Daniel standing in the doorway, arms folded, asking who she was talking to, and then spending the next 2 hours explaining to her, from Scripture, why ungodly friendships were corrupting her spiritual life. She stopped wearing certain colors, stopped laughing too freely at family gatherings, stopped sharing her opinion in conversations when Daniel was present, because she had learned, painfully, that contradicting him, even gently, even lovingly, would result in hours of cold silence that stretched across their home like a fog. The worst part, Sunday mornings. Every Sunday, Daniel stood before the congregation, radiant with authority and grace, preaching about God's love, about covenant, about the beauty of a Christ-centered marriage. Women in the congregation would look at Grace with barely concealed envy. "You are so lucky," they told her repeatedly. "He is such a man of God." Grace would smile. She had perfected the smile. Warm, grateful, peaceful. Inside, she was screaming. She began to cry in the bathroom. Not dramatic, heaving sobs. She had learned to suppress those, because Daniel had once told her that excessive emotionalism was a sign of spiritual immaturity. These were silent tears, the kind that fall straight from your eyes without a sound, as if even your grief has learned to be quiet in order to survive. She prayed constantly, desperately. "Change him, Lord. Please. Soften his heart. Change me, Lord. Show me what I'm doing wrong. Lord, is this your will for my life? Is this what marriage is supposed to feel like?" Heaven seemed completely silent. It started over a phone call. Grace's younger sister had called to share exciting news. She was pregnant with her first child. Grace, flooded with joy, had laughed loudly and talked excitedly for nearly 40 minutes, completely forgetting that Daniel had asked for dinner at 7. By the time she set the plate down, it was 7:40. The temperature in the room dropped immediately. Daniel ate in silence. Grace apologized 3 times. The 4th time she opened her mouth, he set his fork down very slowly, very deliberately, and looked at her with eyes that had no warmth in them at all. "You are consistently disrespectful," he said quietly. "Daniel, I was talking to my sister. I don't want to hear it." He pushed back his chair. "I've been patient with you, Grace. I have tried to be a godly husband to an ungrateful woman. I am tired. I'm not ungrateful. I was on a call. Get out." The words exploded through the house. Grace flinched so violently she knocked her glass off the table. It shattered on the kitchen floor, and somewhere in the back of her mind she thought, "That's what I feel like right now." "Daniel, get out of my house." He grabbed her bag from the counter and hurled it at the front door. Then he opened the door, and the cold night air rushed in like a wall of ice. And before Grace could fully understand what was happening, she found herself standing on the front step, the door slamming shut behind her, the lock clicking with a cold and final sound. She stood there barefoot, in her house clothes, at 11:30 at night. She stared at the closed door for a long time. Through the frosted glass panel, she could see the living room light flip off. He had gone to bed. The cold rose from the cement through the soles of her bare feet and crawled up through her entire body. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked up at the sky, a wide, black, star-scattered sky that suddenly felt infinite and indifferent. And she whispered the question that broke her own heart. "God, if I leave him, am I leaving you too?" Silence. Then she sat down on the cold step, put her face in her hands, and wept in a way she hadn't wept in years. Not quietly, not carefully, desperately, in the raw, ugly, uncontrollable way that only happens when something inside you is finally, completely broken. She doesn't know how long she sat there, but somewhere in the middle of that darkness, when her tears had dried to salt on her cheeks and her body had gone numb with cold, a memory surfaced. Quietly, unexpectedly, like a candle being lit in a room that has been dark for so long you'd forgotten what light looked like. It was a sermon she had heard months ago from a visiting minister whose name she had already forgotten. She had barely been paying attention that day, but one line had snagged on something inside her and refused to let go. Yes, God hates divorce, but read the whole verse, church. Read the context. Because the same God who hates divorce also says he hates oppression. And he hates a man who covers himself with violence. Grace lifted her head. He hates oppression. She turned the words over slowly in her mind, like someone picking up a stone they have walked past 100 times and finally noticing that it's gold. She had spent 3 years believing that staying was faith, that enduring was obedience, that suffering in silence was her cross to carry, that every time she thought about leaving, she was betraying God, rebelling against his sacred institution of marriage, spitting in the face of a covenant she had made at the altar. But what if she had been believing a lie? What if the version of Scripture Daniel had fed her, carefully selected, deliberately weaponized, was not the voice of God at all, but the voice of a man protecting his control? For the first time in 3 years, Grace did not pray for Daniel to change. She did not pray for herself to be more patient, more submissive, more spiritually mature. She prayed one simple, trembling prayer. Lord, show me the truth. Whatever it costs me, show me the truth, and give me the courage to walk in it. The wind shifted slightly. The night was still cold. Nothing miraculous happened in the physical world, but somewhere deep inside Grace's spirit, something ancient and immovable settled into place. A quiet voice, not audible but undeniable, that said, I have never left you. Not once. Not for a single moment. I have been sitting on this cold step with you the whole time. The following morning, Grace called Sister Patricia, a retired counselor and elder in the church who had known Grace since childhood. She was one of the few people Grace trusted completely, and more importantly, one of the few people who had never been swept up in Daniel's public persona. They met at Patricia's kitchen table, over 2 cups of tea that grew cold because Grace talked for so long. She told her everything. All of it. 3 years of it. The criticism, the isolation, the spiritual manipulation, the escalating anger. The night on the cold step. All of it. Patricia listened without interrupting, without flinching, without once suggesting that Grace was exaggerating or overreacting. When Grace finally fell silent, Patricia reached across the table and took both of Grace's hands in hers and said 4 sentences that rewrote everything Grace thought she knew. What has been done to you is not love. It is not discipline. It is not God's will for your life. And leaving it is not rebellion, it is survival. Grace broke down completely at the kitchen table that day. Not from pain this time, but from something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Relief. The relief of finally being believed. The relief of finally having the right words for what she had been living through. The day Grace packed her bags was the hardest day of her life. Her hands shook as she folded her clothes. Her heart hammered so violently she had to sit down twice just to breathe. Every item she placed in that suitcase felt like an act of war against the life she had built, the vow she had made, the woman she had tried so desperately to be. The whispers came immediately. Of course they did. She gave up. She wasn't strong enough. What about her covenant? Daniel is going to be devastated. He tried so hard with her. Grace heard every word. She carried every judgment. Some days, she woke at 3 a.m. convinced she had made a terrible mistake, that she had failed God, that the cold and hollow feeling in her chest was the consequence of her disobedience. On those nights, she returned to Patricia's kitchen, or she opened her Bible to Psalm 34 and read it until her breathing slowed. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Close to the brokenhearted, not disappointed in them, not ashamed of them. Close. Healing did not come quickly. Grace wants you to know that. She wants you to know that it was slow, and it was hard, and there were entire months where she questioned everything, where her faith felt like a garment hanging on a single thread. But it did not break. Slowly, impossibly slowly, and then all at once things began to shift. She began praying without fear for the first time in years. Not measured, performance-perfect prayers designed to avoid Daniel's criticism. Wild prayers, honest prayers, the kind that sound more like crying than speaking, the kind God runs toward, She began to laugh again. Really laugh. Loudly, freely, without checking the room first. She began to look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back at her. She began to understand deep in her bones, not just her mind, that God had never required her suffering, that He had never pointed to her pain and called it holy, that the marriage covenant she had made was sacred, yes, but that a covenant cannot be sustained alone, and that what Daniel had constructed was never a covenant at all. It was a cage with scripture painted on the bars. Grace is not a fictional character. She is a composite of real women. Women in your church. Women in your family. Women sitting in the pew next to you on Sunday morning, wearing their best smile and their quietest pain. And if you are one of them, if you are reading this right now and recognizing your own story and Grace's story, then please hear this. God is not asking you to be destroyed in His name. The same God who designed marriage also designed you with worth, with dignity, with a spirit that was never meant to be broken by the person who promised before heaven to protect it. Leaving is not faithlessness. Sometimes, leaving is the most courageous, most God-honoring, most spirit-filled thing you will ever do. And wherever you are right now, whether you're sitting on a cold step at midnight, or crying silently in a bathroom, or smiling through another Sunday morning that's killing you quietly, God is sitting right next to you. He has been the whole time. He has never, not for a single second, left you. She thought walking away from her marriage meant walking away from God. But the moment she finally left, she realized God had been waiting for her on the other side of that door the whole time. Drop Grace in the comments if this story spoke to your soul.